From the School of Communication at American University in Washington, D.C., this is Media in the Mix, a space where we explore topics in communication at the intersection of social justice, tech and innovation, and popular culture. From the X-Men to Superman, Marvel, DC, and everything in between, superheroes have been with us for almost as long as the movies have. But since their invention in the 1930s, these stories have morphed into contemporary texts and themes. What is it about these heroes that resonates so much with us? And what might superhero films and television shows tell us about emerging trends, female directors, and the future of the media industry? On this episode of Media in the Mix, we talk with Jay Jameson, a writer and director, and a story editor on Superman and Lois on the CW. Take a listen. Thank you so much, Jay, for being a part of the podcast today. Really appreciate you coming on. If you could just introduce yourself, tell people who you are for people who might not have ever heard of you and what you do.
For sure, yes. So my name is Jay Jameson. I'm a writer-director, and I'm currently a story editor on season 2 of Superman and Lois on the CW.
Awesome. And so let's start there. Since you're a story editor on Superman and Lois, and Superman is one of the oldest and most well-known superheroes, what do you think it is about his story that keeps audiences interested in returning to it again and again on screen?
Yeah, I think the thing about Superman is, first and foremost, it's an immigrant story, right? Like he is Kal-El from Krypton, who is taken in by some good, wholesome, morally upright Midwestern farmers. And the values they instilled in him are what make him. And it's this idea that as powerful as he is, it really comes down to his heart and trying to make the right decisions and trying to be inspiring and exemplifying the concepts of hope. I always love if he's presented with two impossible choices, he finds a third choice. He figures out a way to do the right thing, no matter what that means. It's just like it's always about doing the right thing and just trying to embody the best of humanity. That's one of the things I think people relate to with Superman. Is like it's not that he's this all-powerful being, it's the choices he makes. It's like that he chooses to be human and trying to empathize with human, and in our show to have a family. So that's, I think that's one of the reasons that he's just become so ubiquitous and such kind of a legacy character throughout the years.
Absolutely. And so, even with that, in today's society, why do you think a lot of superhero, whether it's films or TV series, resonate with a lot of different variety of people?
I think the thing that's happened with the genre is one, the genre has matured. Like I would say, like superheroes are American mythology. A lot of the heroes are in some way based on ancient mythological creatures. A lot of like the DC characters like have direct ties to like mythology. You look at like Wonder Woman and what her story and background is. But even beyond that, like they've used the templates of the old like Greek gods as, some of these heroes. And so for like a long time, when superheroes first started kind of entering the public consciousness, it was in like the 20s, 30s, whole, kind of novels and comic books and all of that. It was like the Great Depression. And so you kind of created all of these like heroes who could pull people out, be beacons of hope in a dark time. And then as it transitioned into, popular media for a long time, the assumption was, they were gearing the comic books and superheroes towards kids. So it was like, this is Saturday morning cartoons. I think over time, though, kids who would watch those cartoons or watch those shows or read those comic books grew up and they had a reverence for those characters. You had writers who treated the medium of comic books like literature. They brought complex ideas and themes and really started delving into what the storytelling medium could do with these comic books, graphic novels, superheroes. And then that started transitioning into the film world. And those people who grew up on those comic books, and those they grew up and became filmmakers, and they started applying that same amount of reverence and care towards making, movies and television. And for a long time, these comic books were or comic book superhero movies were primarily geared towards toy sales. That was like the impetus of a lot of the early stuff. But then, in toy sales, merchandise is still a huge aspect of those films. But I think kind of the same thing happened where you had a lot of people like myself, like my colleagues who are working on these films, who grew up with these characters, and they began to mean more to them, and they were able to bring more weight and more reverence to like what like the storytelling aspects. And then over time, I think it was a combination of, these filmmakers growing up, but also, technology with like obviously CGI and visual effects advancing, where you could tell more kind of visually arresting, eye popping stories. But over time, the genre, the superhero, the quote unquote superhero genre kind of morphed into this broader thing where you could have subgenres within there. You could start telling different types of stories within the container of these superhero characters. So, you've got westerns. Like Logan is basically a superhero western. It's like a more comedic takes, things like Ant-Man. And then you've got, kind of very meta takes like WandaVision. Like you've got the thing like darker, like you got like hard sci-fi, you got space romps like Guardians of the Galaxy. There's so many different stories now because audiences and filmmakers have become more sophisticated in their understanding of the genre, that you're allowed to tell different stories. And the thing that like I think intrigues people is, and this has been true of sci-fi in general, now it's kind of extending into the superhero world, is like you can tell stories about the human experience, but through this heightened lens, so that you can create circumstances you would normally have in a genre. In other genres, you can create this circumstance and then explore what that means in the context of these real human emotions. I think that's what makes the most successful superhero films successful, is like, yes, we love the spectacle. We love the big action set pieces and the fighting and all of that stuff, but really it's like it's the emotion. It's the how the characters relate to each other. It's how they grow and evolve. And I think that the combination of like just audience becoming more sophisticated, and then filmmakers being allowed to treat these properties with a greater sense of care and reverence has like really created the environment that we're living in, where it's just like it's a golden age of superhero content.
Yeah, I love how you drew the parallel of personal life to it meets the story of the art. So art imitates life, and how you made that personal connection. And so for you, how would you say that your love for comics and superhero stories kind of transitioned into where you are today in your career?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, these like comic books were one of my pathways. Comic books were one of my pathways to literacy. It's like when I was a kid, one of the first things I started reading, I would read comic books, and I would read like they had those great novels, but like for kids, where it's like big time, like much shorter, and and even those had pictures in them every couple of chapters. Like I don't know if y'all remember. So and those are the things I remember, where it's like I became like my love of stories and reading, and that eventually led to me wanting to write, all stemmed from that. I remember, the comic book that was kind of my gateway into the whole thing, that I remember vividly, was Giant Size X-Men #1. Chris Claremont and Jim Lee bought it at a Food Lion, and it was like just the art was amazing, the X-Men were amazing. It was just like I loved these characters. And for me, I grew up a black kid in Richmond, Virginia, former capital of the Confederacy. I was, kind of in this kind of liminal in between space, like often, like socially, where it's like I didn't quite fit here, I didn't quite fit in there. And these comic books, these stories were an escape for me. It was a place where I could, relate to these people who were also outcasts, but were still trying to do good. kind of have these fantastical adventures, and I could like kind of escape from the circumstances of like, kind of being that socially awkward kid at the time. And so that just grew and grew and became, and shaped the way that I thought about story, and what you could do, especially with like these ongoing long running comic books where they would like plant nuggets and seeds and characters and then pay it off like 5 years later, and you're like, oh, that's what that was, like it was so cool, like these interconnected worlds, and building all of that. So I think that's definitely, the kind of the impetus for how I wound up here. And like when I was when I was like in high school, I had it's like a $200 a month comic book habit. Like I had the box, the pull box at the store, and I would go in, I would walk out this giant stack. Like literally, any money I made or all of my allowance would go towards like this a stack of comic books. I would go home and I would sit on the couch and I would just like go through them, and they're still, at my mom's house back in Richmond in a closet somewhere. I've got my big pull boxes that I've got to go through at some point. But and to go from that, to being able to work on a show with like Superman, which is the second most recognizable symbol in the world, behind the cross. Like that's pretty wild. And like have a little bit of an influence on like the canon and the legacy of this character has been really kind of surreal for me.
Yeah. I appreciated that you touched on, you know, superhero stories, comics being your pathway to literacy as a person of color, as a Black man. And so, with representation now being shown a lot more in these stories and just being a big topic in the media industry on varying levels, as a person of color, why do you think that talking about diversity in film and television, not just in front of the camera, but behind it, is such, if you will, a hot button issue?
Yeah, I mean, we need more diverse. There was just some study that came out or something I saw where it's like the number of writers of color like far underperforms the actual demographic in the country. If you just
Hmm.
compare that, and like we're making strides, the last couple of years for sure, but like there just need to be more people with diverse backgrounds creating these stories, because like one of the things you start to wonder about and think about is like there are tropes in narrative that are cultural and like ubiquitous, that you just think like, oh, that's the way stories should be told. But you only think that because that's the way they have been told. And we learn a lot about like ourselves and our culture and storytelling from popular media, which has been for the last century driven, like in terms of just film and television, driven by, primarily straight white men. So like it's one of those things where you're like, oh wait, that's stories don't have to be told that way. Stories don't have to be about this thing. Like what about all of these other stories that we're missing out on that just make, for richer content, but also make for a richer experience for those watching it. Being exposed to different cultures and different points of view and dynamics is so important for building empathy. So I can understand what another person is going through and build those connections, build those bridges of connections through narrative. And so the way you do that is by getting more people of color from different backgrounds and who have different points of view telling stories, like giving them and empowering them to, speak their voices, and having network executives support, their narratives, and giving them the platform to do so, and not hiring like a black writer and then watering down what it is that they're trying to say. It's like, and so I think it's not just, to your point, it's not just representation in front of the camera, it's the representation behind the camera, and it's representation at like the studio and network level, because like that's the next step, is like it's like, okay, you hire all of these black writers, but you still are, you're getting notes from executives, you're going through the whole process, like the whole ecosystem needs to have as many diverse points of view as possible, so that you can craft, these narratives, and have those connections and have those conversations that lead to the strongest stories that we can, get out, and people can watch and say, oh, I didn't know about that, I didn't think about that, I didn't even know that existed. speaking to the point of the superhero genre, Watchmen, the miniseries, you know, for a lot of people, put the Tulsa massacre on the map. Like people didn't know about it, and you know, Damon Lindelof like went and reached out. He found out about it. He hired a bunch of black writers, worked with them, like and helped craft that narrative. And then HBO supported that vision, and they put it out there, and they created a really fantastic series overall that also had like these other elements, like these cultural elements of awareness kind of snuck into it. So like we're able to like really empower storytellers from all different sorts of backgrounds. You create an environment where you have great stories, but you're also exposing people to things that they didn't know, or to ideas, or to and idea, like I said before, building empathy. Like that's what my personal goal is, like putting as much positivity out in the world, and showing how we are more connected than we are separated.
Absolutely. And so, even in creating that empathy, having more people of color at the forefront, as we've started to see in the past few years in lead roles on screen, what do you think is inspiring this change of more people of color actors, or even actors with disabilities in these leading roles like Black Panther, Shang-Chi, or even superhero TV series like Black Lightning, Teen Titans, and others?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things. One, it's the people who are getting more opportunities because they've grown up in an environment where it's incremental steps along the way, right? Like each generation, there are like movements where it's like you grow up watching this
Hmm.
thing, and so you are more in tuned with like diversity, people of color, and it becomes more and more normalized to have those opportunities presented, and to put that out there and to support them. Number one. The other thing is like there's just an economic aspect to it. I mean, is there was a long time where it's like, oh, certain movies don't make money, overseas. Like certain movies, certain stars, like we just can't. Like it's too urban. We can't make money. Like the myth for a long time was like only Will Smith was like the marketable person of color internationally, and then movies like Black Panther shattered all of that. You know what I'm saying? It made like billions of dollars, and then it's like, oh, okay. If you hire the right people, if you hire a genius like Ryan Coogler, and you surround them with a machine of just very talented craftspeople and actors and storytellers, and you give the proper support,
Yeah.
then your movie will make money. It's the thing where it's like, I think for a long time that because people were like, oh, these movies don't make money, so we're not going to invest that much money into these movies, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of these movies don't make money. It's like you didn't give it your best shot. So how are you supposed to know whether or not that film would have, or made a dent in the market or not? So now that kind of thinking has been disproven, and so then we're getting more opportunities, and each time it's like, yeah, Shang-Chi did great. They were doing a sequel, what I'm saying, in a pandemic. You know what I'm saying? They tried to look at like there was some articles where they were like putting their nose up at like Shang-Chi's numbers compared to like maybe some other, like the tracking or whatever, compared to some other Marvel films. It's like, yeah, but those films didn't come out in a pandemic. Like the whole ecosystem is changing, so we have to like change with it. And so like I think the economic aspect is helping push that. The other thing is, because there's more content being created on the streaming platforms, one of the things that you need to do when trying to build, like when you're trying to like put a movie together, you need like a quote unquote bankable star, or you need a bankable asset, right? So it's like either a star, or it's a piece of IP, or sometimes it's the writer or the director, but you need something that is going to, because there's so much content, like rise above the noise and allow for people to like say, oh, I want to go see this thing. Whatever the Marvel thing is, cool, I'm going to go see that because Marvel has a proven track record. No matter what they do, it's going to be a certain level of quality. Or if it's an actor or whatever. So, but for the longest time, if you're trying to get an actor to like launch your to do an indie film or to launch a career as a filmmaker, like you're a person of color trying to make your film, there were a bunch of actors, but because there weren't as many opportunities for those actors to do the small roles to build their names up, there weren't as many bankable actors to get other movies greenlit, right? So they couldn't do the thing where it's like there weren't the opportunities like Brie Larson doing Short Term 12, right? Like she's done a bunch of other kind of guest spots here and things there, and she's a great actor, but like she did Short Term 12 and that got that film made likely because they're like, okay, this is a bankable enough star and we have like this really great script and this really talented director and we're going to make this film for a cost and like it's going to go to Sundance, so all this other stuff. There weren't as many opportunities for the black actresses to kind of build their way up to create that opportunity to do. But now we have so many like streaming platforms and other sources of content where it's like we are able to kind of get these other actors the reps to become the star. Like Simu Liu, like being on Kim's Convenience Store on Netflix, kind of gave him the opportunity to like kind of grow his name enough to become Shang-Chi, which now then launches him to the next stratosphere, right? So it's like it's kind of I look at it as like it's like the minor leagues. It's like you need more teams in like AAA baseball so that you can get those to like work your way up to make it into the major leagues. And so now we have more opportunities like that where you have, Letitia Wright, who's on like Black Panther, going on like coming from Black Mirror, and like all of these other kind of like smaller things where like people are growing their name and getting a shot and being able to like show what they can do to allow them to get to that next step.
So, do you think some of these diversity shifts will make a lasting impact? Are they here to stay? Do you think that this is just for a time period?
I mean, like everything, I think there are ebbs and flows. I believe that there are in the last couple of years, there have been enough people who have created their own ecosystem to keep this movement going forward. You have people like Ava DuVernay, who is just producing a bunch of stuff, making a bunch of stuff, providing a bunch of opportunities, giving a lot of directors their first episodes of television on Queen Sugar. You have Reggie Rock Bythewood and Gina Bythewood who have an overall deal, who are like mentoring young filmmakers coming up and giving them the platform and kind of, opening doors for them. You have so many people who have kind of come up and been tolling away for years who are now opening those doors and keeping them open for the next group. And then that group ideally will continue to do the same going forward. I mean, that's my goal. It's like my friend and I always talk about like these coaching trees where you have like head coach who coached some players and some assistants, and then the players will retire and become coaches, or the assistants will go on and become coaches. And so then you see the coaching tree where it's like Greg Popovich's coaching tree, like a bunch of his assistants have gone on to become head coaches, or former players have gone on to become head coaches around the league and had their own success. And they learned a lot from Greg Popovich, who gave them their opportunities, but then they also like they grew on their own, and now they're providing opportunities and they're passing it on to their assistants and their players, and then it becomes this like kind of branching tree. And that's the thing that like you know I'm trying to create, like a lot of my peers are trying to create, is like the ecosystem so that this thing can continue going on.
It's awesome. And so previously you mentioned how Shang-Chi was produced and came out in the middle of a pandemic, and how its numbers weren't necessarily as quote unquote successful as its predecessors. But even recently, Spider Man No Way Home broke records for advanced ticket sales in the middle of a pandemic. And there have been discussions around superhero fatigue or criticism about the superhero genre being, quote unquote, boring or not cinema or too formulaic. And so I wanted to know, do you think that that's something that will continue?
I think that, yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where when you think about going to the movies now, that aspect of the spectacle and it being an event becomes more of a draw. Just because people have bigger. I mean, this is nothing. I'm not saying anything that no one has never said before. Like people have bigger screens at home. They have surround sound. It's much more comfortable to watch certain films at home. For me, I love going to the movies. I think there are a lot of people who still love going to the movies. It's just a matter of like it's not as easy now for me to just like there would just be a random afternoon where I'd just go to the I won't feel like going to the movies. I wouldn't even necessarily want to go see anything in like specific. I'll just see what's playing, hop in, watch a movie, and it was great. And I don't think that's happening as much anymore in terms of just like kind of you have to have something to draw you there. And of course, the big IP, the big spectacle. That's the thing where it's like, oh man, I've got to see this. I've got to see this in IMAX. Like I can't watch this on like my TV at home, as awesome as it is. So yeah, I think that like there will continue to be superhero films and big IP and big spectacle stuff. Do I wish there were like more? I think there does need to be like a little bit more of like a balance in terms of like, like some of the smaller film. I mean, I miss some of like the smaller dramas and kind of psychological thrillers and all of that stuff anyway. And a lot of that stuff is like going straight to streaming now, which I understand, but I do kind of miss that experience of seeing those in the theater. As far as the criticism of superhero films, I mean, I love them. So I'm not the right for like I feel like they are. I think they are cinema. There are amazing craftspeople and storytellers who put these things together. It's like, yes, are they a bigger machine than some other like smaller indie films? Yeah, but like it's still an awesome machine. Telling some really cool stories and pushing the medium forward.
So I kind of want to backtrack back to talking a little bit about the diversity piece, but more so about women directors in the superhero genre. So women have directed several Marvel properties in 2021, including, Black Widow and Eternals, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Loki. And so a good number of women have directed superhero films that have quote unquote underperformed at the box office. And those directors have received a lot of specifically fan backlash in a way that their male counterparts have not. And so, despite the success of these films and these series, why do you think that there continues to be hesitation to embrace women as directors of these films in the superhero action genre?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough because, one, all the films and projects that you talked about, I loved, and I think that there need to be for sure there need to be more women directing these projects. One of the unfortunate aspects of, I guess, call it like nerd culture is that there is, I mean, this is our society in general, but like I've seen it in some of like the darker aspects of nerd culture. There's like kind of this misogynistic kind of bend to certain things where it's like you view things through a certain lens, and without you take every kind of instance, like every anecdote as the rule when that's not really the case. So it's like, oh, this movie didn't do as well, like Black Widow didn't do as well as these other films. Black Widow was an awesome movie that got pushed multiple times because of a pandemic and still came out in a pandemic. You know what I'm saying? So it's like okay, like it didn't perform as well, but it performed, I think, pretty daggone well. And then the other thing is like, if we want to be real, more men have bombed at the box office than women. Period. Like specifically in the genre of superhero films, there are more men who have bombed than women. So it's like, like what are we really talking about? I think there just needs it's the thing where there need to be more opportunities and there need to be more like second chances. Like that's the other thing. Women and people of color often for a long time would get like one shot. And if whatever, and there's so many reasons a movie might not do well. There's so many factors. There like what else is coming out that weekend? What's on TV that weekend? A pandemic. that thing, like an actor gets like in some sort of scandal, whatever. Like there's so many things that like your success is tied to that, and like you see certain other directors get like two or three bombs and then they get that third or fourth film and it hits and all of a sudden they're great. It's like, yeah, they got a couple of swings at bat, like, like, and so that's the thing. Like to me, that's when, like when we're talking about diversity and stuff, like that's when things will really be kind of equal, is like when people of color and women get the opportunity to fail as much as their white male counterparts. Get another chance, get another crack at it.
Yeah. And so, just to kind of wrap up, for you, what kind of superhero films do you hope to see in the future, but also the kind of real world issues that you hope to see in them?
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things that like I've been working on, like on the side. I can't talk about yet, but I think being able to tell all kinds of stories within that rapper, like, you know, because I feel like if there's any kind of movie you like, you could probably find a superhero film that fits that other genre, right? Like you can find something that, and I just want that to continue to happen. Like, just people with interesting voices, using the genre, using this modern mythology to tell their very specific stories about their very specific human experiences. And that's the kind of stories I want to see. Like, I mean, both in the superhero genre, because that's what we're talking about, but just in film and television in general, like that's the kind of stuff that I want to see. Like when I'm, a lot of times people talk about this industry as being like very competitive, and it is. It's difficult to begin. It's difficult to have your voice be heard, but people often, or too often, I think, operate from a place of scarcity where it's like, oh, if this other person is doing well, then that's my spot. Like, or I can't. It's like, no, like, so they'll hoard their contacts or they'll hoard their opportunities. And I don't feel that way. Like, I'm like, yo, if I can get more people in, that's more awesome stories that I have the opportunity to watch and experience. And, and so that's what my mindset is like, yes, let's just get as many people who are talented and competent telling stories and writing stories and directing things as possible. Like no one's going to do the exact thing that I'm going to do. There are people who are going to do stuff very close. And there are times where it's like I've seen things or people announce things where it's like, man, it's like I wish that was me, whatever. But like, it's like, okay, well, I would have done things a little bit different. And now I have so many other things to tell. It's like, I don't have to tell that story because that person did a really good job telling something that was like 90% of that thing. So I'm going to go concentrate on this other thing that no one is doing right now. And so like, that's the kind of ecosystem that I want to see grow and develop. It's just like people supporting each other and just having as many different diverse types of stories told, because the human experience is like infinite. You know what I'm saying? Like there are just so many things to discover and experience and learn and all, and I just want all of us storytellers to try to maximize that potential as much as we can. And so that's what I'm hopeful for. It's like, and whether those are in the superhero genre or something else. I mean, the thing about the superhero genre is like it right now, it's a great Trojan horse, big spectacle where it's like get people in the seats, you can get your budget, but then you can really use that medium to tell really interesting stories or explore really interesting ideas within there. And like that's, to me, that's the best use of the medium right now.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see your future projects, Jay. I'm sure they're going to make amazing stories. And thank you so much for talking with me today and being a part of the podcast. I really appreciated it.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me. And quick plug, Superman in Love on the CW. January 11th is our season 2 premiere. It's going to be awesome. And season 1 is on HBO Max. Full season, you can watch it there.
Media in the Mix is a production from the School of Communication at American University. Our podcast is available for listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Anchor, and wherever else you can stream podcasts. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn to see how our community is changing media one step at a time. Catch you on the next one.